I spent my entire life building a safety net for my children, only to realize they were the ones cutting the ropes. I thought being a devoted mother meant unconditional love, until I found a single sheet of paper hidden in my own garage that proved my children had stolen my future, standing on the porch of the home my late husband and I built brick by brick. The cold wind felt like nothing compared to the ice in my veins. My name is Valerie. I am 60 years old, a retired school administrator, and for the last 3 years since my husband passed away, my only goal was keeping our family united. I gave my children everything. I smoothed out every bump in their road, but as I stared at the paper trembling in my hand, I learned the most painful lesson of my life. The deepest wounds do not come from strangers, or enemies. They come from the very people you gave life to, the ones who look you in the eye and smile while they take everything you have. The nightmare actually began 2 days earlier, on a freezing Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen pouring my first cup of coffee when the refrigerator suddenly hummed to a dead stop. The lights flickered and died. The heater went completely quiet. Annoyed but unconcerned, I grabbed my phone and called the utility company, expecting to hear about a downed power line in the neighborhood. Instead, the customer service representative delivered a sentence that made my stomach drop. She told me my power had been disconnected for non-payment. I laughed a nervous, confused sound and explained that my accounts were on autopay and I had plenty of funds. But when the representative read back the payment history, a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The account had been completely drained. My balance was 0. My bills were months past due. I am 60 years old. I worked hard, saved diligently, and thought my retirement was completely secure. Now, standing in my freezing kitchen, the panic truly set in. I realized I had absolutely no access to my own money, and I could not even afford to turn the lights back on. My late husband and I built our lives around a single unwavering promise. We swore our children would never know the bitter sting of poverty or the bone-deep exhaustion of working multiple jobs just to keep the heat running. For 35 years, we sacrificed every comfort for them. We skipped summer vacations, drove second-hand cars until the engines gave out, and poured every spare dime into savings so our son Marcus and our daughter Jasmine could start their adult lives with a completely clean slate. We handed them the world on a silver platter, hoping it would make them strong and capable. Instead, it made them soft, expectant, and deeply entitled. When my husband suddenly passed away 3 years ago, my entire world shattered into pieces. The grief was a physical weight on my chest, so heavy I could barely remember to breathe, let alone manage the complicated financial portfolio we had built. That was the moment I made the most fatal mistake of my life. I desperately wanted to believe my children were my safe harbor. I needed to trust them to catch me while I was falling. So in a blinding haze of mourning and exhaustion, I walked into the local bank branch and added both Marcus and Jasmine to my primary accounts. I signed over a limited power of attorney without a second thought. I told myself it was just a practical safety measure. They could help Mum manage things. They could pay the property taxes and handle the estate paperwork, so I would not be completely overwhelmed. I handed them the absolute keys to my entire life, fully believing they would protect my golden years the way I had always protected their childhood. I was completely blind to the terrifying reality that I had just given 2 hungry wolves the combination to the vault. The financial drain did not happen overnight. The creeping greed disguised itself as temporary emergencies and strings of bad luck. It started out seemingly innocent. Jasmine came to my house crying hysterically about a luxury vehicle payment she could not afford, swearing she would pay me back the moment her annual bonus cleared. The bonus never materialized, but she certainly kept driving the expensive car. Then it was Marcus. He always had a new, brilliant business venture that was absolutely guaranteed to make millions. If only his mother could provide a generous bridge loan to get the project off the ground. When those businesses inevitably failed and the money vanished into thin air, he never once apologized or offered a repayment plan. If I ever dared to hesitate before opening my checkbook, or if I gently suggested they needed to start living within their actual means. The emotional blackmail was swift and ruthlessly effective. They completely weaponized my love for them. They would look at me with manufactured disappointment and accuse me of abandoning them when they needed me most. Even worse, they weaponized the sacred memory of their father. Marcus would stand right in the middle of the living room we built and boldly claim that Dad would have wanted him to succeed, that Dad would never have let his only son face bankruptcy. Jasmine would tearfully demand to know why I was selfishly hoarding money when my own children were suffering. They brilliantly twisted my profound grief into unbearable guilt, forcing my hand every single time. I wrote those large checks because I desperately thought I was maintaining family harmony. I truly believed I was being a good and supportive mother. I did not realize I was actively funding my own financial destruction. After the terrifying phone call with the utility company, my confusion quickly curdled into a cold, sickening suspicion. I wrapped a heavy wool blanket around my shoulders and walked out to the freezing garage. 2 weeks ago, Jasmine had offered to organize my mail and clean out my home office, claiming she just wanted to help her mother declutter. She had shoved a large cardboard box labeled junk mail into the darkest corner next to the winter tires. I pulled the box out and dropped to my knees on the hard concrete floor. My heart began pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs as I tore open the taped flaps. Inside, I found months of sealed envelopes from my bank and my retirement fund mixed in with old newspapers. I frantically pulled out my phone and opened my banking application. I typed in the password I had used for 5 years. Access denied. I typed it again with shaking fingers, praying it was just a typing error. Account locked. Please contact your administrator. The air completely left my lungs. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely grip the edges of the envelopes. They had deliberately intercepted my paper mail and systematically changed my digital passwords. They built a wall around my own life and locked me outside in the cold. Every instinct in my body screamed that my children had made a terrible mistake. I desperately tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation for this nightmare, but the sickening dread pooling in my stomach told me the horrific truth before my eyes could even read the documents. My own children had laid a trap for me. I dug deeper into the bottom of the cardboard box, pulling away layers of grocery circulars and old magazines, until my fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope. It was crumpled and shoved hastily out of sight. I ripped it open and pulled out a stack of heavy legal documents. The bold black letters at the top of the first page seemed to swim and blur together before finally snapping into agonizing focus. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. My vision went completely dark at the edges. I flipped frantically through the stapled pages, searching for an explanation. Then I saw the absolute proof of my destruction, my fully paid-off home. The beautiful house my husband and I had poured our blood, sweat, and tears into was heavily encumbered by massive debt. According to the documents, Marcus and Jasmine had used the limited power of attorney to authorize a massive second mortgage. They had extracted hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity straight from the walls of my sanctuary. The paper trail laid out a story of pure, unrestrained greed. I saw the attached transfer receipts routing massive sums of cash directly into Jasmine's checking account to fund the designer clothes and luxury vacations she constantly flaunted. I saw the massive wire transfers paying off the business debts Marcus had recklessly accumulated over the years. They took everything my husband and I had built and drained it completely dry. But the ultimate betrayal was still waiting for me on the final page of the packet. The document clearly stated that no payments had been made on the massive new loan for over 6 months. The bank was officially seizing the property. A final eviction date was stamped in glaring red ink at the bottom of the page. I had less than 30 days before the county sheriff would arrive to throw me out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on my back. The sheer calculated cruelty of it broke something deep inside my soul. My own flesh and blood had systematically robbed me blind and then left me to drown in the wreckage. While I was sitting in my freezing dark kitchen, worrying about how to pay the electric bill, they were sleeping soundly in warm, comfortable homes purchased and maintained with my stolen security. They knew the bank was coming to take my home, and they simply did not care. They planned to just let their grieving mother lose everything so they could walk away clean with their stolen cash. The crippling grief I felt for my late husband vanished in that freezing garage. It was instantly replaced by a searing, blinding rage that burned away every remaining trace of the soft, forgiving mother they thought they had permanently defeated. I sat on the freezing concrete floor of the garage for a long, quiet time. The tears that had threatened to spill over my eyelids completely dried up now. I finally realized in that cold, dark space that weeping would not pay the electric bill, and crying would certainly not save the home my husband and I had built. A profound shift occurred deep within my spirit. The heartbroken widow vanished. In her place stood a fiercely protective woman, fueled by cold, calculated anger. I gathered every single piece of paper from the cardboard box and marched back inside the freezing house. I knew I could not fight this battle alone. I needed someone who understood the intricate language of contracts and deception. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person I knew I could completely trust. I called my late husband brother, Uncle Terence. Terence was a sharp, no-nonsense retired real estate auditor who possessed a mind like a steel trap. He arrived at my house less than an hour later. When I spread the crumpled foreclosure notices and the massive loan documents across the kitchen table, his warm brown eyes hardened into dark flint. He scrutinized the forged signatures and the lengthy wire transfer receipts with terrifying precision. Terence did not offer me empty platitudes or useless pity. He immediately recognized my children's actions for exactly what they were. This was textbook financial fraud and severe elder abuse. We spent the next 3 days working in complete silence. We sat at the dining room table, compiling a flawless, impenetrable paper trail. Terence used his professional contacts to bypass the digital locks my children had placed on my accounts. We traced every single stolen dollar from my home equity directly into Jasmine luxury lifestyle and Marcus failed business ventures. We printed out the undeniable proof of their crimes and organized everything into neat, terrifying stacks. Terence looked at me across the table and asked if I was truly ready to destroy the comfortable illusion of my family. I looked at the eviction notice stamped in bright red ink and felt absolutely nothing but cold resolve. I told him I was not destroying the family. My children had already burned it down to the ground. I was simply preparing to hand them the ashes today, right now, and forever take back my stolen peace and quiet life. Once our devastating arsenal of evidence was completely assembled, I knew I had to draw Marcus and Jasmine out of their comfortable hiding places. I needed them inside my house, where they could not simply hang up the phone or run away from the consequences. I picked up my phone and completely transformed my demeanor. I channeled the helpless, overwhelmed mother they firmly believed they had successfully manipulated. I called Marcus first, and then Jasmine. I made sure my voice sounded shaky and thick with fake tears. I told them I was so embarrassed, but I had run into a minor banking glitch while trying to buy my weekly groceries. I cried softly into the receiver and begged them to come over for a traditional Sunday dinner so they could help their poor, confused mother sort out a tiny withdrawal. As expected, they both sighed heavily and complained about how incredibly busy their schedules were. They tried to brush me off with vague promises to call the bank on Monday. That was the exact moment I laid out the irresistible bait. I suddenly lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I told them that while I was cleaning out the garage, I had stumbled across a forgotten life insurance policy that their father had opened decades ago. I explained that it was a substantial amount of money, and I desperately needed their physical signatures on the documents so I could properly distribute the wealth between the three of us. The change in their attitudes was absolutely instantaneous. The heavy sighs vanished and were immediately replaced by breathless, eager tones. Marcus suddenly remembered he had a free afternoon, and Jasmine miraculously rearranged her entire social calendar. Greed is a highly predictable poison. They did not care that their mother was sitting in the dark without electricity or food. They only cared about the fresh pile of money they falsely believed was waiting for them. I hung up the phone and smiled a cold, hollow smile. The trap was officially set, and the mice were racing toward the cheese. I spent the rest of the morning cooking their favorite Sunday meal using emergency cash Terence had provided. The house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh-baked rolls. It was the perfect disguise for the absolute destruction I was about to unleash upon my entirely ungrateful and treacherous offspring right on time today. They arrived exactly at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Marcus drove up in a brand new sports car that my stolen equity had undoubtedly paid for. Jasmine walked through the front door wearing a designer coat that cost more than my monthly pension. They both wore the same fake, sweet smiles they always used when they wanted something from me. Jasmine kissed my cheek and immediately started looking around the living room, asking where the insurance documents were hiding. Marcus rubbed his hands together like a greedy child waiting for a birthday present. I calmly asked them to take their usual seats at the dining room table. The roasted chicken sat untouched in the center of the table, surrounded by their favorite side dishes. I walked into the kitchen, but I did not return with plates or silverware. I walked back into the dining room, holding the thick manila envelope Terence and I had prepared. I stood at the head of the table looking down at the two people I had loved more than my own life. I did not scream or cry. I simply opened the envelope and slid the bright red eviction notice directly across the polished wood. Marcus grabbed the paper, his smug smile instantly freezing on his face. Jasmine leaned over his shoulder, and her eyes grew wide with sudden, absolute terror. Before they could say a single word, I began pulling out the rest of the documents and slapping them onto the table one by one. I dropped the forged second mortgage application. I dropped the lengthy bank statements detailing every single fraudulent wire transfer. I dropped the massive receipts for the sports car and the designer clothes. I spoke in a quiet, lethal tone, detailing exactly how they had systematically drained my accounts and left me to be thrown out onto the street. I watched the arrogant color completely drain from their faces. Their fake sweetness melted away, leaving only the ugly, naked panic of two criminals who realize they have been entirely caught. Marcus started stammering out a pathetic lie about a terrible misunderstanding and an investment gone wrong. Jasmine began to hyperventilate, claiming she had absolutely no idea what Marcus had done. I slammed my hand down, silencing their pathetic excuses. I told them the time for lies was completely over, and the reckoning had officially arrived for both of them today. Marcus scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest as he leaned back in his chair. He had the absolute audacity to laugh a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the silent dining room. He looked me right in the eye and arrogantly declared that I could not do a single thing to stop them. He reminded me, with a cruel sneer on his face, that I had willingly signed over the power of attorney. He actually tried to tell me that everything they did was perfectly legal, because I gave them the authority to manage my estate. Jasmine nodded vigorously beside him, her fake designer fingernails tapping against the table as she smugly agreed that I had no case. They were so confident in their own twisted brilliance. They truly believed they had outsmarted their aging mother. That was the exact moment the kitchen door swung open and Uncle Terence walked into the room. The smug expressions vanished from their faces instantly. Terence walked up to the table and placed his heavy hands on the back of my chair. He looked at Marcus and delivered a devastating reality check in a voice as cold as steel. Terence explained that a standard limited power of attorney does not legally cover major real estate transfers or the acquisition of secondary mortgages. He pointed a long finger at the massive stack of loan documents and stated the terrifying truth. In order to secure that loan, Marcus and Jasmine had to forge my physical signature on the final notary documents. Terence leaned forward and whispered that mortgage fraud and forging a signature on official bank documents are not just simple mistakes. They are federal crimes carrying mandatory prison sentences. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at my children, watching the horrifying realization dawn in their eyes. I delivered my final, chilling ultimatum. I told them I had already frozen every single remaining account. I had already filed a comprehensive police report for identity theft and severe financial fraud. I gave them two very clear choices. They would immediately cooperate with the bank investigators to legally transfer every single penny of that massive debt solely into their own names, assuming the entire financial burden they created. If they refused or tried to fight me, I would hand the entire unredacted file over to the federal prosecutor and watch them both go to federal prison. Faced with the terrifying prospect of a federal indictment, their pathetic bravado completely crumbled into dust. They wept and begged for mercy, but my heart was completely closed to them. They signed the binding confession agreements Terence had legally prepared, officially taking on the massive mountain of debt they had recklessly accumulated. The immediate consequences for them were absolute and entirely justified. The bank relentlessly pursued them for the defaulted loans. Marcus had his bank accounts completely frozen and his heavily leveraged assets systematically seized by the creditors. His supposed business empire collapsed overnight. Jasmine faced immediate crushing bankruptcy. The luxury vehicle was loudly repossessed right out of her driveway in front of her neighbors, and she was forced to sell every single designer item she had purchased with my stolen security, just to afford a tiny, cramped apartment. They lost absolutely everything they had bought with my stolen money, and they permanently lost the unconditional love of the mother they had so callously abused. But this story is not just about their well-deserved downfall. It is about my hard-won liberation. Walking through the empty halls of my old house, I realized the memories there were permanently tainted by their profound betrayal. I did not want to keep the house anymore. I legally forced the sale of the property, because the official fraud investigation proved my signature was undeniably forged. The bank was legally forced to restore my stolen equity in full during the final settlement. I took the massive check from the sale and never looked back. I downsized to a beautiful, highly secure luxury condominium complex on the peaceful side of the city. My new home is filled with bright, natural light overlooking a stunning garden where I drink my morning coffee in absolute peace. I have completely changed my phone number and severed all contact with the people who tried to destroy my future. I am finally living strictly for myself, surrounded only by people who truly respect and protect me like Uncle Terence, who comes over every Sunday for a dinner filled with genuine laughter and zero deception. I am 60 years old, and my golden years are finally my own. I survived the ultimate betrayal, and I emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and completely untouchable. To all the mothers out there listening to my story today, I want you to hear my voice and understand this vital truth. You simply cannot pour from an empty cup, and you certainly should not pour it for those who only want to drink you completely dry. We spend our entire lives giving our hearts and hard-earned resources to our families because society tells us that a good mother must sacrifice everything she has. But true love should never leave you broken in your old age. You must fiercely protect your peace and protect your golden years because no one else will do it for you. If my personal journey of betrayal and ultimate triumph resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more powerful, true stories. I want to build a strong, supportive community of survivors right here. Please let me know down in the comments. Where are you watching from today? And what exactly would you have done if your own children tried to take your home? I will be reading and replying to as many of your comments as I possibly can. Thank you for listening today, friends.